I assume you know how the Senate works. They get 60 votes to do things.
Scott,
we have 53 votes.
Leadership.
There's a gulf of 7 votes.
Is there
that one guy?
Is leadership an option here? The president himself has said,
it would be good
this ballroom.
The Republicans had a deal. House Republicans rejected it. That wasn't a Democrat idea.
The president has said
we should enforce immigration laws.
Republican and Democratic administrations have all believed some solution needed to be done about the lack of space in the White House. A leadership would look like, let's come up with a plan that we can all agree on because we know that this is a problem. Let's resolve it. Trump chose not to take that path intentionally. Why?
In today's video, Abby Phillip completely shuts down Scott Jennings on Newsnight with Abby Phillip. The bigger issue here is actually pretty simple. Who gets to decide what happens with federal property like the White House? Because historically, even presidents don't have unlimited authority when it comes to major construction on federal grounds. And we've seen why that matters. When big projects move forward without clear approval, you end up with situations like this. Projects started, money spent, and then everything stalls because the legal process wasn't fully followed. But before we dive into today's video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one.
The judge
says, projects you're mentioning,
but the judge says you just got to go to Congress one way or another.
All of those projects, the congressional approval was for the funding. Not for the actual job, not for the design commission.
That is not true.
In fact, so Joe, in the case of the Theodore Roosevelt,
hold on.
With Roosevelt building the West Wing, there was a controversy, and Congress didn't adjudicate it.
Okay.
Congress just approved the funding. There was a controversy about how and big the West Wing should be, whether they needed it.
We just went over that.
Not
all these other
the idea of it. They approved the funding.
All these other examples, there were varying degrees of congressional approval. Some of them involved the back and forth about what the plans were and what the scope was. They involved money. The judge is basically saying it can look however Congress wants it to look like. It just has to go to Congress.
I'll bet you a nickel if you can find me an example of Congress approving a design for a White House thing.
I'm not understanding the point of what you're saying.
Because
are you disputing that Congress has approved these plans?
No, I'm saying that Congress has approved the funding for specific projects. This project did not require any funding. It doesn't require a congressional authorization of any funds of any kind.
I guess what I'm saying is the
Congress gets to have a role, and I don't think we can be so casual.
Even the judge said the president is the steward of the White House.
You know what? I don't like what the judge said, so we're just going to ignore it. I don't think we can be so casual about setting a precedent where the president says, I'm going to bypass Congress, because if you do it here, if you allow it here, who knows where that's up. That's a very slippery slope. A judge has ruled. We're the law and order party, aren't we? So why don't we follow the law?
Under federal law, especially statutes like 40 U.S.C. Section 8106, Congress isn't just a funding body. It has oversight over construction on federal grounds in D.C. That includes what gets built and where, not just writing the check. The whole point of that law is to prevent any president from making major structural changes to public property unilaterally. And historically, even when presidents had strong control over projects, there was still some level of congressional involvement or approval process, whether through committees, planning commissions, or formal authorization. It wasn't just go ahead and build, no questions asked. There's always been a paper trail and a process. The bigger issue here is precedent. If a president can move forward with major construction without going through Congress just because it doesn't require new funding, that opens the door to bypassing oversight entirely. And that's exactly what the separation of powers is supposed to prevent. There's also the practical side. When projects move forward without clear authorization, you get situations like this where things stall midway, money and time get wasted, and now it turns into a legal fight instead of a completed project. So the point backing Abby here is pretty straightforward. It's not about whether the president should have a role. Of course they do. It's about whether that role has limits. And if those limits aren't followed, it's not just a one-off situation. It sets a precedent that could be used in much bigger ways later on.
They're going to appeal it. I mean, he just has a different legal point of view, which is, to Joe's point, because we're not asking for any money, we should be able to do this. We'll see what an appeals court says. I actually think ultimately, if he had to get a Republican Congress to stick a line in a bill somewhere to say, sure, build your ballroom, he could probably get it done. How long would that take? And I think that's part of the issue is he wants this built. And now there is a big hole in the ground. and they do want to put, I think, a secure bunker under there, apparently, which is a good thing to have. And so I think you do want to get this done in a timely fashion. And that's something the president has always been
wasted a
worried
lot
about.
of time. He could have gone to Congress before he put a hole in the
done
ground.
it last year.
Yeah.
They passed several bills last year. He could have stuck it in.
Okay,
40
renovation.
This is
ballroom.
40 USC 8106, buildings on reservations, parks, and public grounds. A building or a structure shall not be erected on any reservation, park, or public ground of the federal government in the District of Columbia without the express authority of Congress. So this is addressing.
It doesn't say funding.
It doesn't say anything about funding. It says you cannot build without Congress Congress permitting it. And that's what the judge is actually saying. It has nothing to do with the money, actually. Congress can say, hey, we'll give you $5 and you raise the rest. They can say whatever they want. It's a separation of powers issue.
Yes, that's exactly it. Let's preserve, the judge has said, Congress gets to weigh in on this. Whatever that looks like, there's a lot of ways to get there. And I think that there are a lot of ways to get there, and I have no problem with that.
And a lot of ways that would give Trump a lot of, if they wanted to, they could give him a lot of rope on this.
Let me ask you a question. There's a big hole in the ground right now. The Democrats have had the Department of Homeland Security shut down for over 40 days, the longest shutdown of something important in our nation's history. What are the odds they would just say, no, we will not go along with any kind of language to rebuild this while Donald Trump is the president? Do you want a hole sitting there for the next?
Well, you got a Republican House, a Republican Senate, a Republican president,
and yet
if you can't get your own party
to vote for it, and yet the Democrats have the Department of Homeland Security shut down, which is a trivial matter.
It was Republicans who rejected a Republican proposal the other day.
I guess
House Republicans and Senate Republicans can't get on the same page right now.
What really backs up Abby and Kurt in that debate is that this isn't some gray area where the rules are unclear. The legal framework here is actually pretty well established, moves forward without Congress signing off. It doesn't hinge on whether taxpayer money is used or not. The key issue is authorization, not just funding. That's part of the constitutional design where Congress controls federal property and the executive carries things out, not the other way around. And historically, when presidents did want to move quickly on big projects, they still went through Congress first. Even during wartime or urgent expansions, there was usually some form of formal approval process, committee review, or legislative sign-off. It might have been fast, but it wasn't skipped. The big hole in the ground argument actually kind of proves the point. That's what happens when you start a project before clearing the legal process. You end up wasting time, resources, and now you're stuck in court instead of building. If anything, that shows why the process exists in the first place. And on the political side, the idea that this is being blocked purely by one party doesn't fully hold up either. We've seen multiple times, even recently, that intra-party disagreements can stall things just as much as partisan ones. When one party controls the House, Senate, and presidency, delays usually point to internal divisions, not just opposition from the other side. So the bigger point is that this isn't about slowing things down for the sake of it. It's about following a process that's meant to prevent overreach. Because once you start making exceptions like, we'll just build first and figure it out later, you're not just solving one problem, you're setting a precedent that could be used in much bigger ways down the line.
I feel like we've forgotten that leadership used to be about working even when you had divided government, which actually we don't have right now, even when you have not complete power. It used to be a thing that you would work with the other side and come to a deal, whether it's on funding the Department of Homeland Security or building a ballroom. Back in the day, that was a thing that we expected presidents to be able to do. Why is it that now all of a sudden it is impossible for it to be done?
And when both houses are your own party for the president, it makes no sense.
I assume you know how the Senate works. They get 60 votes to do things.
Scott.
We have
Leadership.
53 votes.
Leadership.
Leadership.
There's a gulf of 7 votes.
Is there-
that one guy?
Is leadership
We might go along with it.
is leadership an option here? The president himself has said.
Yeah, and it would be good if
this
Democrats would show
ballroom.
some.
The
Senate
president
Republicans had a deal. House
Right.
Republicans rejected it. That wasn't a
Yeah,
Democratic
they
deal.
The president
the
has
idea that
said
we should
those were
enforce
Republicans who
immigration
can't
laws.
talk to
Republican
Republicans.
and Democratic
One chamber doesn't know what the other chamber's doing.
administrations have all believed some solution needed to be done about the lack of space in the White House. Leadership would look like, let's come up with a plan that we can all agree on because we know that this is a problem. Let's resolve it. Trump chose not to take that path intentionally. Why?
I cannot wait to be at the Donald Trump ballroom when this is all said and done, celebrating whatever the heck the event is. Look, I ascribe to the president's legal
third
theory
inaugural
in this
show?
case.
Is that what you're hoping to be?
Right, yeah, that's the one. That's the one.
2030.
Again, so the president, even the judge in this case, said that the president is essentially the steward of the White House and has the authority to make significant changes within the White House. Okay.
With the proof.
This is one of those things where
that's not what the
Missing
judge
some
said.
words
Okay.
there. Missing some words there.
Look, the delta between what people are talking about in media on this and what the public cares about this, I think, is a huge gap.
58% of Americans disapprove. 56% of Americans oppose the destruction of the East Wing. So I guess if you take it that way.
Historically, even during periods of intense division, presidents still found ways to work across the aisle on things way more complicated than a construction project. Think about major bipartisan deals like the 1983 Social Security reform under Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, or even post-9/11 security legislation, where both parties had serious disagreements, but still moved quickly because there was leadership pushing it forward. The system wasn't perfect, but there was at least an understanding that you don't just stall when you have the power to act. And that's where the current situation starts to look shaky, when one party controls the White House, House, and Senate, but still can't pass something relatively straightforward. That usually signals internal dysfunction, not just opposition from the other side. In fact, political science research has shown that unified governments are supposed to pass more legislation, not less, because there are fewer institutional barriers. So when that doesn't happen, it raises real questions about coordination and priorities. There's also the public opinion angle that backs this up. When a majority of Americans are already uneasy about changes to something as symbolic as the White House, pushing forward without broad consensus actually makes things worse politically. Presidents in the past understood that. Even if they technically had the authority, they still sought buy-in to avoid backlash and legitimize the decision. And on the Senate math argument, yeah, the 60-vote threshold is real, but that's been true for decades. What's different now is the decline in negotiated compromise. Data from groups like the Bipartisan Policy Center shows that cross-party legislation has dropped significantly over the last 20 years, not because the rules changed, but because the willingness to negotiate did